where Charles III has been formally proclaimed the King of England. The ceremony took place at St. James Palace a few hours ago. Charles III has promised to serve the nation with the same devotion as the late Queen Elizabeth II. She was on the throne for 70 years. Our UK correspondent Olly Barratt joins me now for an update from Windsor. So just the mood, Olly, obviously, a mood of loss, the loss of Queen Elizabeth, but also at the same time a nation that is grappling with a transition that not many would have witnessed. In fact, I doubt anyone, well, let's say not many would have witnessed before in terms of the accession of the king.
Hardly anyone has ever witnessed that before for a couple of reasons. One is that the last time this transition happened, of course, was 70 years ago, so the vast majority of people in this country weren't even around then. The other reason is that that particular ceremony has never been televised before, and so the only people alive who saw it last time around were the very, very few people who would have been actually there in person for it, for that proclamation. The decision was clearly taken to televise it, to give people as much access as possible to all of the events that are going on at the moment, and the cameras showed us that Privy Council, the Accession grouping of politicians, former and present. We had a number of former Prime Ministers in the room for the events, for example, and witnessing it was the Queen Consort, Camilla, but also Prince William too. He had travelled from Windsor, where I am and where he's living at the moment, and that proclamation is really a recognition, a formal recognition from the various wings of government that the King is now the King, has taken over from Queen Elizabeth on her passing. King Charles, as soon as the Queen had died, became the King, but this is really the next step in the formalities of recognising that, and that proclamation started, as you say, at St James's Palace in London, but has now been fanning out across other parts of the United Kingdom, and we expect that that's what Prince Charles, now King Charles himself, will do in the coming days, start to move around the country, visit with and meet with and see as many of his subjects now, if we can call them that in the modern age, as possible.
Yeah. Olly, outline for us as best as you can the historical elements that are being brushed up for the first time in 70 years. The Privy Council, for example, is a concept that, to be quite honest with you, is a concept that I know from just, the realm of law, in that anyone who, any of the legal systems of countries that are former British colonies will have had one or two or a few judgments that were delivered by the Privy Council. This is the first time that I actually see, from my vantage point, the Privy Council coming into action, and it's in this format. So the Privy Council, the Accession Council, and all the ceremonies and traditions that are being brushed up for the first time in 70 years, as best as you can.
Yeah, the Privy Council is an interesting one, Tulis, because there are lots of people in this country as well who really don't know what it is or what it does. It's a body that is nominally to advise the monarch, and it is made up of, as I say, current and former politicians and officials, mostly from this country, but representatives from others as well around the realms and the Commonwealth. And it's made up of currently around 700 people in total. They weren't all there today, probably a couple of hundred people actually turned up. And as I say, there were a bunch of former Prime Ministers in the room: Boris Johnson, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron. They were all there. Keir Starmer, the current leader of the opposition, he was there. As I say, the idea is that it advises the Queen, and then the Accession Council is really put together for this exact purpose, and Penny Mordaunt is the current president of that council, and that was why she was essentially hosting these proceedings. She, by the way, is the first woman ever to host these proceedings. So that, along with the fact that this was televised, another example of how it's moving a little bit with the times, at least. Prince Charles had to sign, King Charles, excuse me, we're all still getting used to that, had to sign a number of documents to do with various approvals of moving forward with his recognition, but also to do with the Church of Scotland, because he's of course the head of the Church of England. The Church of Scotland has a slightly different separation between church and state in Scotland than the Anglican Church does, so all sorts of complicated matters to sort out. And then it ends with that proclamation, and we saw those members of the public moving towards that balcony in St James's Palace. That really is an echo of how this would have been carried out many years and centuries ago, decades and centuries ago. Is the idea is that that's how the public would have learnt that this had taken place. They would have just had it shouted to them off a balcony. Of course, this day we saw it all unfold with the cameras, but that element retained, as the British often do, to try and keep some of that old-fashioned pomp and ceremony in these events, even as they move into much more modern eras.
And we've also heard from King Charles III immediately after the accession ceremony was concluded, Olly. And my understanding is that much of that speech, understandably, was dedicated to the memory of his late mother.
That's right. It was a short speech today, much shorter than the address to the nation he gave last night, and it really was much of it about his mother. He talks again about the devotion and service to the country. That was a key theme in his address to the nation as well. It is very obvious that the King is trying to get that message across to the British people, but also the people of the Commonwealth, that he wants them to feel that his primary objective is to serve them and to be as dutiful as he believes that his mother was. And in that, he's trying to say to people that there's continuity here, that yes, there's change. We're moving from the Elizabethan era into the Carolean era, as it's being known. But at the same time, he wants people to know that even if some elements are different, that there will be a great amount of continuity as well. Because going back to your first point, for the vast majority of people in Britain and indeed in the Commonwealth, they've never known anything like this. They've only ever known the Queen, Brits, as their head of state, and that leads to a certain amount of uncertainty and fear and anxiety for some people about exactly what lies ahead. And I think the King is trying to point to those themes in his mother's reign that he says he wants to lean on and continue to try and reassure people that there is going to be continuity as well as change.
Lastly, Olly, are we hearing any details about, the plans for the funeral? How's that looking, and what are we looking at in terms of when it might be held?
Yeah, we're still not getting a date, and the best guess at the moment is probably Monday the 18th of September. It could be the Tuesday, it could even be over the weekend before that. One thing we did hear today is that the King approved it as a public holiday for the UK, so some people will welcome that very strongly, others will welcome it less strongly. Parents, for example, often when they get public holidays sprung on them, wonder what they're going to do exactly with their children. But there will be a holiday on the day of the funeral, whenever that takes place. We do know that Joe Biden will come. The US president has said that he will be there. But one of the great challenges for officials putting that together has been the guest list. So many dignitaries from around the world. You can tell just from how many politicians and leaders have paid tribute to the Queen, you would assume would like to be there. Added to that is the complication that in the coming week we have the United Nations General Assembly starting, so world leaders would expect to be there, and how will they assess their travel plans to and from New York, and then adding perhaps a pit stop in London to that schedule. So that's a difficulty, and also officials are working out how exactly they're going to assess how many people are going to be in London and in places like Windsor on the day itself, and really working out policing numbers and all that kind of thing. So huge task ahead for all of those officials, and I suspect that is why we haven't yet got the date, because they're trying to get as many things worked out as possible before they tell everyone when it's going to be.
All right, Olly Barratt live for us in Windsor. in the United Kingdom there with an update for us around the processes around the accession of King Charles III, as well as preparations for the funeral of the late Queen Elizabeth II.